Chapter 1: The Quiet Wait. The lawn did not need to be cut. Chris knew this before he pulled the cord and listened to the mower cough itself awake. The grass was barely long enough to justify the noise, but the sound gave him a job, and the job gave him permission to stay outside where the air was moving and nobody was watching his face. He pushed the mower in neat, obedient lines. His father had always done it that way, even when no one was home to see it. Chris caught himself correcting the angle halfway through the second pass, embarrassed by how automatic the instinct felt. Inside the house, Melanie was helping his mother pack clothes. Shirts folded into boxes with careful labels. Jackets lifted from hangers and held briefly, as if the fabric might explain itself if given the chance. Chris stayed outside until there was nothing left to cut. When he finished, he wheeled the mower toward the shed at the back of the property. The structure looked exactly as it always had, wide, practical, faintly weathered. His father had built it himself, adding the desk in the back after the fact, because he needed somewhere to think. Chris had never questioned that. He rolled the mower into its corner, wiped his hands on his jeans, and paused. The shed smelled like oil and wood and something metallic he couldn't name. The desk was still there, cluttered in the careful way of someone who knew where everything was. Chris sat down. He didn't plan to. His legs just bent, and suddenly he was facing the place where his father had spent so many evenings, working on invoices, fixing broken radios, sketching measurements for repairs that would happen on weekends no one scheduled. "Hey," Chris said softly. The word echoed, small and useless. He rested his forearms on the desk. The wood was worn smooth where his father's hands had rested for years. "I don't really know what I'm supposed to say," Chris admitted. "Everyone keeps telling me you'd be proud of me. Like that's helpful." He laughed once, short and humorless. "You never actually said that, you know? Proud. You just nodded. A lot." He swallowed. "I think I mistook that for certainty." Chris opened the top drawer without thinking. Inside were tools neatly arranged. He closed it and tried the next. The third drawer stuck slightly. He tugged, harder than necessary, and it slid open with a soft scrape. 5 leather-bound journals sat inside, stacked carefully. Each was labeled in his father's precise handwriting. Years, nothing else. Chris lifted the top one. Felt heavier than it should have. He opened it randomly, half expecting to find lists or budgets or reminders. Instead, the page was filled with writing, tight, careful, deliberate. "Did I give up too much for my family?" Chris stared at the sentence. He read on. The entries weren't complaints. There was no bitterness, just questions, observations, small admissions written as if they were dangerous and needed to be handled gently. His father wrote about interests he'd never mentioned, hobbies he'd never tried, careers he'd considered briefly before choosing the safe one. Chris flipped pages faster now, breath shallow. His father wrote about love as responsibility, about usefulness as identity, about the fear of letting anyone down outweighing the desire to feel alive. Chris leaned back in the chair, dizzy. He had known his father as a role, not a person. The man who fixed things, the man who showed up early, the man who stayed late, the man who never said no, the man who never rested. Chris reached the final entries. One, dated a month before the heart attack, stopped him cold. "Feeling more tired lately. Burning in my back. Probably nothing. Need to get to bed earlier." Chris closed the journal. His hands were shaking. He sat there for a long time, the shed quiet around him, the mower cooling nearby. The man he had loved had worked himself into the ground and called it devotion. Chris felt something crack. Not break, but shift. He thought of his own calendar already full, of favors accepted automatically, of how often he measured his worth by how needed he was. He thought of Melanie, efficient and kind and always appreciative of how reliable he was. He wondered, suddenly, what she loved about him when he wasn't useful. The shed door creaked open. "Chris." Melanie's voice was gentle, careful. "Your mom's asking if you want some water." He looked up, eyes stinging. "In a minute," he said. "I just found something." She stepped inside, noticed the journals, the way he was holding one like it might disappear. "Oh," she said softly. "Those must have been your dad's." "Yeah," Chris replied. "I didn't know he kept them." She smiled, sad and fond. "Your dad was full of surprises." Chris almost laughed. "I don't think anyone noticed," he said. Melanie tilted her head. "Noticed what?" He hesitated. "That he was tired," Chris said. "All the time." She moved closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. "He loved you," she said. "He loved all of you." "I know," Chris replied. "That's what scares me." She didn't understand yet. He could see it in her face. But the thought had already taken root. Love couldn't mean disappearing. If you had to erase yourself to be worthy of care, something had gone terribly wrong. Chris closed the journal carefully and placed it back in the drawer. For the first time since his father's death, he felt the weight of the future, not as obligation, but as a question. And he wasn't sure how to answer it. Chapter 2, the postponement. The email subject line read, "Change of plans." Chris stared at it for a full minute before clicking send. Once it was gone, it was gone. The venue coordinator, the caterer, the florist, the photographer. Each message carefully worded. Polite, apologetic, calm. Each one felt like a small public announcement that grief had interrupted efficiency. Melanie watched him from across the kitchen table, legs tucked beneath her, laptop open and already filled with tabs. "You forgot the cake tasting," she said, not accusingly. "We should tell them too." Chris nodded. "Right. The cake." He typed, deleted, retyped. "I liked the lemon one," he added, as if that mattered now. Melanie smiled faintly. "You liked all of them." "That's not true," he said. "The chocolate espresso one tasted like regret." She huffed a laugh, quick and surprised, then sobered just as fast. "I'll handle the bakery," she said. "You've done enough." Chris's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "That's not," he stopped himself. "Okay." The word tasted strange. He wasn't used to agreeing so easily, but his chest felt tight, and the idea of arguing, even gently, felt exhausting. They worked in silence for a while, punctuated only by the click of keys and the occasional notification ping. Every few minutes, Melanie would sigh, not dramatically, just a controlled release of air, like she was managing pressure. Finally, she closed her laptop. "That's everyone," she said. "We're officially paused." Chris leaned back in his chair. Paused sounds temporary, like a streaming service. She smiled again, this time a little more real. "Exactly. We'll hit play later." He nodded, but the metaphor didn't land the way she seemed to want it to. Later felt vague. Later felt like something that belonged to other people. "So," Melanie continued, folding her hands together. 1 year. 1 year," Chris echoed. "It gives us time," she said. "Time for your mom. Time for us. Time for everything to settle." Settle. Another word that sounded reasonable and heavy at the same time. Chris thought of the journals in the shed, of his father's handwriting, careful and contained, asking questions that never got answered. "Yeah," he said. "Time." Melanie studied him. "You're okay with this, right?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. "I mean," he said slowly, "I know it's the right thing. That's not what I asked." Chris smiled, reflexive and practiced. "I'm okay." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We're doing this together." Together. Another good word. A comforting one. He squeezed back. That afternoon, they drove to his parents' house to tell his mother in person, though she already knew. She'd been the one to suggest postponing, voice gentle but firm, eyes tired in a way that scared Chris more than tears would have. "I don't want you rushing into joy when you're carrying this much sadness," she'd said. "It's not fair to either of you." Now, she sat in her armchair, hands folded in her lap, nodding as if the decision had been inevitable all along. "A year is sensible," she said. "Your father would have agreed." Chris winced before he could stop himself. His mother noticed. "What?" "Nothing," he said. "Just, he never really agreed with anyone. He just adjusted." She smiled, a little wistful. "That's true." Melanie chimed in brightly. "We'll still help around the house, and holidays don't change. We're not disappearing." His mother reached out and took her hand. "I know, dear. You've been wonderful." Chris watched them, the ease between them, the quiet understanding. Melanie was good at this, at being present, helpful, appropriate. Later, as they drove home, Melanie made a list out loud. "Okay, so, we need to let my parents know. And your aunt. And we should probably update the wedding website." Chris groaned. "We have a wedding website?" "You insisted," she reminded him. "You said it made things official." He sighed. "I don't remember that. You were very into fonts that day." He smiled despite himself. "I stand by that." She glanced at him, amused. "See? You're still you." The comment lingered longer than it should have. That evening, his phone buzzed constantly. Messages from friends, coworkers, distant relatives who had just found out. Everyone had something to say. "Take all the time you need. Your dad would understand. At least now you can make it even better next year." Chris replied with thumbs-up emojis and polite reassurances until his wrists hurt. At one point, Melanie leaned over his shoulder. "You don't have to respond to everyone." "I know," he said. "I just don't want them to think I'm ignoring them." She raised an eyebrow. "They'll survive." He nodded but kept typing. Later, in bed, the lights off, Melanie curled against him. "I know this is hard," she murmured. "But I'm proud of us." Chris stared at the ceiling. "For what?" he asked quietly. "For being responsible," she said. "For making a mature decision." He thought of his father again. Of the way responsibility had swallowed everything else. "Yeah," he said. "Responsible." She shifted, propping herself up on one elbow. "You don't sound happy about that." He hesitated. Sometimes I wonder if we're very good at doing the right thing, and not very good at asking if it's what we want." Melanie frowned slightly. "Those aren't opposites." "No," he agreed. "But they're not always the same." She studied him for a moment, then relaxed, resting her head back on his chest. "We want this," she said. "We've always wanted this." Chris closed his eyes. Had he? The thought felt disloyal, so he pushed it away. Yeah, he said. We have. She kissed his collarbone. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will feel lighter. He listened to her breathing even out, slow and steady. Tomorrow felt like a promise he wasn't sure how to keep. When sleep finally came, it brought dreams of unfinished sentences and clocks with no hands, ticking loudly anyway. Chapter 3, Inherited Habits. Chris did not mean to start reading the journals at work. It happened the way most of his worst habits did, quietly, reasonably, with a justification that sounded responsible if you didn't examine it too closely. He brought one with him just in case. The logic was flimsy but comforting. Lunch breaks could be long. Grief was unpredictable. Better to have something grounding nearby. The leather-bound book sat in his backpack all morning like a secret. By 10:30, Chris had already agreed to cover for Mark's Friday shift, taken on an extra report that technically belonged to another department, and volunteered to stay late for a client call scheduled inconveniently close to dinner. You're a lifesaver, Mark said, clapping him on the shoulder. I don't know how you do it. Chris smiled. He always did. At noon, instead of going out with the rest of the team, he stayed at his desk. He told himself he wasn't hungry. He told himself he'd eat later. He told himself a lot of things that required very little evidence. He opened the journal. The entry he landed on was short. I say yes before I ask why. Chris felt an unexpected bark of laughter rise in his chest. He covered his mouth, glancing around. No one noticed. Everyone was busy. He read on. His father wrote about being indispensable. About the way praise came easily when you made yourself useful. About how refusal felt like failure even when it wasn't. Chris closed the journal slowly. Across the aisle, Jenna from accounting rolled her chair over, balancing a coffee dangerously close to the edge. You okay? She asked. You just made a noise like a startled seal. He snorted despite himself. Sorry. Reading something personal. She leaned back. Dangerous choice at work. Tell me about it. She sipped her coffee, studying him. You've been saying yes to everyone lately. He shrugged. That's not new. It's more new than you think, she said. You used to at least pretend to consider it. Chris blinked. I do consider it. Jenna raised an eyebrow. You consider it for exactly the amount of time it takes to inhale. He laughed, then stopped. She softened. I'm not judging. I just, don't burn yourself out, okay? I won't, he said automatically. She rolled away, unconvinced. That evening, Chris stayed late. The office emptied gradually, lights clicking off row by row. By the time he shut down his computer, the sky outside had gone dark. Melanie texted. Still at work? Almost done, he replied. Dinner's getting cold. Sorry. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. You don't have to apologize, she wrote. I know you're busy. He stared at the message longer than necessary. Busy was a word that sounded productive, useful, harmless. At home, the smell of reheated pasta lingered in the air. Melanie sat at the table, scrolling on her phone. You didn't eat, Chris said. She looked up. I did. I just didn't wait. Right, he said. Of course. He microwaved his portion, standing there while it hummed, the journal heavy in his bag. Over dinner, Melanie filled him in on her day meetings, a coworker's engagement announcement, a new project she was excited about. Chris listened, nodded, asked the right questions. You're quiet, she said finally. Just tired. She studied him. You've been tired a lot. He hesitated. That happens. Not like this. He sighed, setting his fork down. I brought one of my dad's journals to work today. Her expression softened. How was that? Uncomfortable, he admitted. Enlightening, like being called out by a ghost. She smiled gently. That sounds like him. Chris looked at her. Did you ever feel like he was always on? She thought for a moment. He was dependable, constant. Do you think that's the same thing? She tilted her head. I think he took pride in it. So do I, Chris said. That's the problem. She frowned slightly. I don't follow. He stood, carrying his plate to the sink. I think I learned that being needed was the same as being loved. Melanie crossed her arms, not defensively, but thoughtfully. Is that bad? It can be, he said. If you don't know who you are when nobody's asking for anything. She watched him rinse his plate. You matter to me whether you're busy or not, she said. I know, he replied, and he meant it. But knowing something and feeling it were not always aligned. Later that night, Chris lay awake, journal open on his chest. Melanie slept beside him, breathing even. He read an entry he hadn't noticed before. I worry that if I stop, everything will fall apart. That they won't know what to do without me. That maybe I won't either. Chris closed the book. He thought of the office, of the way people praised him for reliability, of how good it felt to be thanked, of how hollow it felt afterward. He thought of Melanie, efficient and capable, loving him without demanding more, but benefiting from his constant availability all the same. The next day, at work, Mark asked him to cover another shift. Chris opened his mouth, then closed it. I can't, he said. Mark blinked. Oh, okay. Chris waited for the discomfort, for the guilt. It didn't come. Instead, there was something like relief. At lunch, he went outside and ate a sandwich on a bench, watching people pass by. He didn't read the journal. He just sat. That evening, when he told Melanie about saying no, she laughed. "Wow," she said. "Who are you and what have you done with my fiancé?" He smiled. "Still me. Just experimenting." She leaned against the counter. "As long as it doesn't turn into a crisis." Chris thought of his father's last unanswered questions. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." But somewhere deep down, he suspected that was exactly what it was becoming. Chapter 4, The Joke That Lands Wrong. The barbecue was supposed to be casual. That was the word his aunt used when she invited them. Casual, said brightly, as if grief could be diluted by paper plates and potato salad. Chris stood in his parents' backyard with a soda he hadn't opened, watching smoke curl up from the grill. The sound of conversation layered over itself. Laughter, updates, the clink of tongs against metal. It looked like a normal family gathering, which somehow made it worse. Melanie leaned into his side. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said, just bracing. She smiled sympathetically. "We don't have to stay long." He nodded. "I know. They didn't, of course, stay long. That never happened." His uncle waved them over already mid-story. "And I told him, that's not how you measure twice." But he wouldn't listen. Just like his dad. There it was. The comparison slipped in so easily it barely registered as a choice. Chris smiled faintly. "Chris always was like that," his cousin added. "Steady, reliable, just like Uncle Tom." Someone raised their cup. "To the man who kept everything running." Chris lifted his soda automatically, even though the words felt like a hand pressing down on his chest. Melanie squeezed his arm, proud, affectionate. Later, while people ate and drifted and talked in small groups, Chris found himself cornered by his aunt and a neighbor who'd known him since childhood. "You know," the neighbor said warmly, "your father would be so proud of you. You've stepped right into his shoes." Chris laughed, came out sharper than he intended. "Is that good?" he asked. They blinked at him. "Of course it is," his aunt said. "He was a wonderful man." "I know," Chris replied. "He just worked himself to death." The words dropped between them like a glass shattering. The neighbor cleared her throat. "Well, he was dedicated." Chris nodded. "That's one word for it." Melanie appeared beside him, a hand light on his back. "Chris," she murmured. "Maybe, I'm not trying to be rude," he said a little too quickly. "I just think we talk about it like it's a compliment. Like the goal is to disappear completely as long as everyone else is comfortable." His aunt's smile tightened. "Honey, that's not fair." "I know," he said. "I'm not saying it's anyone's fault. He stopped. Everyone was watching now, concerned, confused. "I think I need some air," he finished. He walked away before anyone could stop him. Out by the fence, the noise faded to a dull hum. Chris leaned forward, hands on his knees, breathing slowly. Melanie joined him a moment later. "That was intense," she said carefully. "I know," he replied. "I didn't mean to make a scene." "You kind of did." He straightened. "I didn't plan it." She crossed her arms, not defensively, but protectively, of the moment of the people inside. "They were trying to be kind." "I know," he said again, frustration creeping in. "That's the problem. Everyone keeps being kind in a way that scares me." She frowned. "Scares you how?" Chris searched for the words. They kept slipping away, like trying to describe a dream after waking up. "I feel like there's this script," he said finally. "Be dependable. Be strong. Don't complain. Keep everything running. And if you do that well enough, people will love you." Melanie tilted her head. "People do love you." "Yes," he said. "But I don't know if they know me." She studied him. "I know you. Do you?" The question escaped before he could soften it. Her eyes widened slightly. "Of course I do." He rubbed a hand over his face. "I'm sorry. That came out wrong." "No," she said. "Tell me what you mean." He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I'm good at being useful. I always have been. But I don't know who I am when I'm not solving something or helping someone or being the reliable one." She was quiet for a long moment. "Is this about the journals?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "And about my dad. And about me." She nodded slowly. "Okay, I hear that." He waited. His chest felt tight. "But," she continued, "I don't think usefulness is a bad thing." "I don't either," Chris said. "I just don't want it to be the only thing." She sighed. "I feel like you're criticizing a value that's been good to us." The word carried weight. "I'm not criticizing," he said. "I'm questioning." "Why now?" she asked. "Why does this have to become a big existential thing right when everything else is already hard?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. Because if not now, when? Because his father hadn't questioned soon enough. Because the future suddenly felt fragile. "I don't know how to explain it without sounding ungrateful," he said quietly. Melanie softened, stepping closer. "You don't have to have all the answers." "I feel like I'm expected to," he replied. She hesitated. By who? He gestured vaguely. Everyone, including myself. She reached for his hand. Chris, you're allowed to be lost for a little while. He looked at her. Are you okay with that? She held his gaze. As long as it doesn't mean we lose direction. There it was. The fault line, thin but unmistakable. They stood in silence, the sounds of the party drifting toward them. Laughter, someone calling his name, the sizzle of the grill. Let's go back, Melanie said gently. We don't need to unpack your entire identity at a barbecue. He almost laughed. Fair. They returned, smiles reassembled, roles resumed. Chris answered questions, deflected praise, laughed at the right moments. But something had shifted. On the drive home, Melanie reached for the radio. Do you mind if we just drive quiet? Chris asked. She paused, then nodded. Sure. The city lights passed by, reflected in the windshield. Chris watched them blur. I don't want to become someone I don't recognize, he said suddenly. She glanced at him. You won't. How do you know? Because you're self-aware, she said. You care. He nodded. So did my dad. She didn't answer that. At home, they got ready for bed without their usual easy rhythm. Nothing was wrong exactly. Nothing was right either. As they lay down, Melanie turned toward him. We'll figure this out, she said. Okay. Chris stared at the ceiling, thinking of the way everyone had toasted his father. The way devotion had been mistaken for destiny. Okay, he said, but the word felt less certain than it used to. Chapter 5. Love as Labor. The couple's workshop was held in a beige room that smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and optimism. Chris noticed both immediately. They sat side by side in folding chairs, knees almost touching. A circle of other couples surrounded them, some holding hands, some deliberately not. A whiteboard at the front read, in cheerful marker. Communication is a practice, not a destination. Melanie read it silently, lips pressing together. Chris tried not to laugh. This was your idea, he murmured. I suggested it, she corrected. You agreed. That's not helping my case. She shot him a look that was half warning, half amusement. Try to keep an open mind. I am open, he said, cautiously, like a cat near water. The facilitator, a woman named Linda with a calm voice and aggressively cozy cardigan, smiled at the group. Welcome, she said. Today we're going to talk about how love shows up in our daily behaviors. Chris felt Melanie straighten beside him. This was her terrain. Plans, practices, improvement. Linda continued. A lot of us express love through action, through doing, through showing up. Chris felt a tightening in his chest. That's not bad, Linda added. But sometimes, it's worth asking, are we doing things out of care or out of fear? Melanie glanced at Chris. He stared at the floor. They were paired off for an exercise. Each person was supposed to answer one question while the other listened without interrupting. The question, how do you show love? Melanie went first. I show love by being dependable, she said. By thinking ahead. By making sure the people I care about don't have to worry. Chris nodded. He'd expected that. And by encouraging growth, she added. Helping people become their best selves. Linda smiled. Thank you. And Chris, he swallowed. I show love by fixing things, he said. By being available. By making myself useful. Melanie shifted slightly. Chris continued, the words coming faster now. I try to anticipate needs. I like being the person people can count on. Linda nodded. And how does that feel? He hesitated. Good. Until it doesn't. Melanie looked at him. What does that mean? Linda raised a hand gently. Remember, listening. Melanie nodded. Lips pressed together. Chris took a breath. I think sometimes I confuse love with labor. Like if I stop doing, I stop mattering. The room felt very quiet. Linda leaned forward. That's an important insight. Melanie's brow furrowed. They switched roles. How do you feel loved? Linda prompted. Melanie answered easily. When someone shows commitment. When they're consistent. When they follow through. And you, Chris? Linda asked. He hesitated again. When someone wants me, he said slowly. Not what I can do. Just me. Melanie blinked. Later, during a break, they stood near a table of lukewarm coffee and store-bought cookies. I didn't know you felt that way, Melanie said quietly. Chris rubbed his hands together. I didn't either. Not really. I just thought it was normal. She frowned. I want you for you. I know, he said. But sometimes it feels like you value how reliable I am more than anything else. Her eyes widened. That's not fair. I'm not blaming you, he said quickly. I'm trying to understand the pattern. She crossed her arms. You're saying I see you the way your dad saw himself. No, Chris said. I'm saying I might be offering myself that way. She sighed, frustrated. So what are you asking for? He opened his mouth, closed it. I don't know yet. That answer landed poorly. Back in the circle, Linda asked couples to share one thing they would try differently. Melanie spoke first. I'll try to ask how Chris is feeling instead of assuming I know. Chris smiled at her, grateful. And you? Linda prompted. I'll try to say no, Chris said. Even when it's uncomfortable. Melanie laughed softly. That'll be the day. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. On the drive home, silence stretched between them. I feel like you're pulling away, Melanie said finally. I'm not, he replied. I'm trying to step toward myself. She looked at him. What if those directions don't match? The question hung there. At home, Chris opened one of the journals again. A passage he'd skipped before caught his eye. I thought love meant never needing anything in return. I was wrong. Chris closed the book. In the living room, Melanie folded laundry, efficient and precise. Do you need help? He asked. She paused. I've got it. He sat down anyway. For once, he didn't know what to do with his hands. Chapter 6. The Experiment. Chris signed up for the class on a Tuesday night because Tuesdays felt safely forgettable. He told himself it wasn't a big deal, that it barely qualified as a decision. The community center website made it look almost apologetic. No flashy photos, no testimonials promising transformation. Just a header that read, Introduction to Improv, no experience necessary. Chris stared at it for a long time. Then he clicked register. He didn't tell Melanie. That omission felt significant, though he couldn't articulate why. He wasn't hiding anything exactly. He just wanted to know what it felt like to choose something without immediately explaining or justifying it. The first class was held in a multipurpose room that smelled faintly of gym mats and lemon cleaner. A circle of mismatched chairs sat in the middle. There were 12 people total, ranging from college age to retired, all wearing the same cautious expression of people who had agreed to be uncomfortable on purpose. The instructor was a man named Ray who wore sneakers that lit up when he walked. Rule number 1, Ray announced cheerfully. No one is good at this at first. If you're trying to be good, you're doing it wrong. Chris felt his shoulders tense. That was not how things usually worked. They started with simple exercises, saying names with exaggerated enthusiasm, making faces, passing invisible objects around the circle. Chris overthought every movement. When it was his turn to mime throwing an imaginary ball, he hesitated long enough that Ray grinned. Commitment, my friend, Ray said. Half throws are how balls die. The group laughed. Chris flushed, then, impulsively, threw the ball with dramatic force, nearly losing his balance in the process. The room erupted. Something loosened in his chest. By the end of the hour, his face hurt from smiling. Not polite smiling. Actual smiling. The kind that surprised him by existing at all. He walked home lighter than he'd felt in weeks. Melanie was on the couch when he got in, laptop open, spreadsheets glowing. Hey, she said. You're late. I know, he said. Sorry. She glanced at the clock. Where were you? He hesitated, then decided not to hedge. I took a class. Her eyebrows lifted. A class. Improv, he said. The word hung there. Improv, she repeated. Like, comedy? Sort of, he said. More like structured chaos. She stared at him. Since when do you do improv? He smiled. Since tonight. Her mouth opened, then closed. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't think it was a big thing. She tilted her head. It feels like a big thing. It didn't feel like it while I was doing it, he said. It just felt fun. The word sounded foreign and fragile. Melanie closed her laptop slowly. Is this part of your whole saying no experiment? I said no to staying late, he said. This was saying yes to something else. She crossed her arms. Without talking to me. He frowned. I didn't think I needed permission. I'm not saying permission, she replied quickly. This is new. He nodded. I know. They stood there, facing each other, the space between them filled with unsorted meaning. How long is this class? She asked. 8 weeks. 8, she echoed. That's a commitment. He almost laughed. You should have seen the light-up sneakers. I think commitment is relative. She didn't smile. That night, in bed, Melanie was quiet, not cold, just thoughtful in a way that made Chris uneasy. Do you think this is you avoiding things? She asked eventually. Avoiding what? Us, she said. The wedding, the grief. He considered that. I think it's me not avoiding myself. She turned onto her side, facing him. I'm worried you're changing in a direction I don't recognize. He met her gaze. I'm worried I never changed at all. The next week, Chris went back. And the week after that, he stopped checking his phone during class, stopped worrying about being good, stopped apologizing for taking up space. At work, he left on time one evening to make it to class. Mark blinked. Everything okay? Yeah, Chris said. I have plans. The word plans felt illicit and thrilling. One night after class, the group went out for drinks. Chris almost declined out of habit. Then he didn't. When he got home, Melanie was already asleep. He watched her for a moment. The familiar lines of her face softened by rest. He loved her. That hadn't changed. But something else was growing too. A version of himself that existed whether or not anyone needed him. The following Sunday, Melanie sat him down at the kitchen table. I've been thinking, she said. About everything. Chris nodded. Me too. She folded her hands. I support you exploring things. I really do. I just need to understand where this is going. I don't know yet, he said honestly. That's kind of the point. She exhaled slowly. That makes me nervous. I know. She looked at him, eyes searching. Are you still sure about marrying me? The question landed hard. Yes, he said, then stopped himself. Not because it was untrue, but because it felt incomplete. I'm sure about loving you, he amended. I'm figuring out what kind of person I want to be while I do that. She nodded, but her smile was tight. I don't want to wake up one day and realize we want different lives. Neither did he. That night, Chris opened the last journal. The final entry was short. If I had taken one small risk for myself, maybe the rest would have felt lighter. Chris closed the book. He had taken a small risk. It hadn't fixed everything. It hadn't clarified the future. But for the first time, the weight didn't feel inevitable. It felt negotiable. Chapter 7, The Break Without Drama. They didn't plan the conversation. It happened on a Thursday evening, the kind that felt borrowed from routine. Leftovers in mismatched containers, the hum of the dishwasher, the soft glow of a lamp they'd argued about buying because it was a little expensive for what it is. Chris was sitting on the couch, scrolling absently through his phone without absorbing anything. Melanie stood at the counter, drying a plate that was already dry. She set it down carefully. Can we talk? She asked. Chris nodded. Yeah. She didn't sit right away. That alone told him something. I've been thinking a lot, she said. About us. About this year. He waited. I don't feel angry, she continued. I don't feel betrayed. I just feel off balance. Chris swallowed. Me too. She finally sat, leaving a careful space between them. I keep waiting for things to go back to normal. And? He asked gently. They don't, she said. They just keep becoming something else. He nodded. That's how it feels to me too. She let out a small, humorless laugh. I used to think that was a good thing. Growth. Evolution. Now it just feels like we're diverging. The word landed softly, but it stayed. Chris stared at his hands. I never wanted to pull away from you. I know, she said quickly. You didn't. You turned inward. He looked up at her. That's not better, is it? She smiled sadly. Not when I don't know where you're going. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unsaid things pressing in. I need certainty, Melanie said finally. Not about dates or venues. About direction. I need to know that the life we're building is one we're both choosing, not one we're defaulting into. Chris felt a familiar urge rise. The desire to reassure, to promise, to fix. He let it pass. I can't promise certainty right now, he said. I can promise honesty. Her eyes glistened. I don't know if that's enough for me. He nodded slowly. I don't think it should have to be. She blinked, surprised. You're okay with that? I'm not happy about it, he said. But I don't want either of us to feel like we're waiting for the other to become someone different. She looked down at her hands. I don't want to resent you. I don't want you to, he said. And I don't want to wake up one day realizing I stayed because it was easier than leaving. That one hurt. He could see it in her face. You're saying we should break up, she said quietly. I'm saying we should stop pretending this is just a phase we can schedule around, he replied. I think we need space to figure out who we are without asking the other to stand still. Tears slid down her cheeks, silently. She brushed them away, annoyed with herself. I hate that you're being so calm, she said. It makes it harder to argue. He gave a sad smile. I've had a lot of practice swallowing things. I'm trying not to do that anymore. She laughed through tears. Of course you are. They sat there, the history of years between them. Inside jokes, shared routines, plans carefully made and now gently dismantled. I love you, Melanie said. That hasn't changed. I know, Chris replied. I love you too. She looked at him. But love isn't enough if it's pulling us in opposite directions. He nodded. My dad loved us, and still lost himself. The words were quiet, but firm. She reached for his hand, squeezing it once. I don't want that for you. Neither do I. They didn't fight over logistics. There were no accusations, no raised voices. Just practical decisions made through tears, who would stay where, how to tell people what to do with the things that belonged to both of them. When she packed an overnight bag, Chris helped her fold a sweater. This is the dumbest breakup, she said, voice wavering. We're being so reasonable. He smiled sadly. We always were. At the door, she paused. I hope you find what you're looking for, she said. He met her eyes. I hope you do too. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt impossibly quiet. Chris stood there for a long time. Then he sat on the floor and let himself feel it. Not just the loss, but the strange, aching sense of alignment beneath it. For the first time, he hadn't stayed to be useful. He'd stayed honest. And somehow, despite the grief, that felt like the beginning of something truer than anything he'd known before. Chapter 8, The Man Beneath the Mask. The apartment didn't feel empty so much as unfinished. Chris noticed it most in the mornings. The second mug still sat in the cabinet where it always had, unused but not removed. The extra toothbrush remained in its holder, an unspoken agreement between memory and habit. He didn't rush to erase her. That would have felt like another form of usefulness, cleaning up grief efficiently, tying it off with a bow. Instead, he let the quiet exist. He took time off work, something he'd never done without a plan or a reason he could defend. His manager blinked twice when he asked, "Everything okay?" She said. "Yes," Chris replied. Then, after a pause, "No, but it will be." She nodded, clearly unsure what to do with that. "Take the time you need." He almost laughed at the phrase. Almost. On his third day off, he returned to the shed. The journals were exactly where he'd left them. He carried the last one inside the house this time, sitting at the kitchen table where sunlight spilled across the wood. His mother was out running errands. The house was quiet in a way that felt respectful rather than hollow. The final pages were sparse. His father's handwriting had grown shakier near the end, but the thoughts were clear. "I wonder who I would have been if I hadn't been afraid of wanting more." Chris rested his forehead against his hand. More. Such a small word. Such a dangerous one. The last entry was dated a week before the heart attack. "If love costs you yourself, something is wrong. I hope Chris learns that sooner than I did." Chris closed the journal. For a long time, he didn't move. He felt grief, sharp and aching. He felt anger, quiet but insistent. He felt love, complex and unfinished, no longer something he could romanticize without consequence. Most of all, he felt permission. That afternoon, he went for a walk without headphones. He let the city exist around him. The uneven rhythm of footsteps, snippets of conversation, a dog barking at nothing important. He stopped at a cafe he'd passed dozens of times and never entered because it was out of the way. He ordered something unfamiliar. It was fine, not life-changing, but it was chosen. At improv class that evening, Ray grinned when he walked in. "There he is," Ray said. "The man who commits to imaginary furniture." Chris laughed. "I sat on a fake chair for too long last time. That's how you know it was real." During an exercise, Chris hesitated, then stepped forward anyway, saying the first ridiculous thing that came to mind. The room laughed, not at him but with him. For once, he didn't feel like he was earning it. Weeks passed. He rearranged the apartment, not to erase Melanie, but to reflect himself. He put the journals on a shelf instead of hiding them. He cooked meals that didn't optimize leftovers. He let emails sit unanswered overnight. Some days were heavy. Some were light in ways that surprised him. He visited his mother more often, but he stopped fixing things automatically. Sometimes they just sat. "You don't have to do everything," she told him once, watching him fidget. "I know," he said, and this time it was true. On a quiet Sunday morning, Chris sat at the same kitchen table, sunlight warming the wood. He thought about the man his father had been, the man he had been taught to be. Then he thought about who he was becoming. Not perfect, not resolved, but present. He picked up his phone and typed a message, to no one in particular. Really, just a note to himself, saved and unsent. "I am allowed to want a life that feels like mine." He set the phone down and smiled, small and genuine. Outside, the city moved forward. So did he. Chapter 9, A Different Kind of Beginning. The showcase was optional. Ray had emphasized that several times, hands raised like he was fending off accountability. No pressure, no obligation. Improv is about joy, not performance. If the word showcase makes you want to fake your own death, stay home. Chris signed up anyway, not because he felt brave, because he felt curious. The small theater was half full on the night of the show. Folding chairs, uneven lighting, a stage that looked like it had hosted everything from children's recitals to awkward poetry readings. Chris stood backstage with the rest of the class, listening to the low murmur of the audience. "You good?" asked Nina, who worked in marketing by day and swore like a sailor by night. "Define good," Chris said. She grinned. "You're smiling. That's a start." When they stepped onto the stage, the lights felt warmer than he expected. The applause was polite, encouraging, human. Chris took his place, heart pounding. Not with fear exactly, but with something closer to anticipation. The scenes were messy, funny, occasionally brilliant by accident. Chris forgot himself. That was the magic of it. Not disappearing in the old way through labor or obligation, but dissolving into presence. Saying yes without calculation. Letting moments pass without needing to fix them. At one point, he found himself playing a man who'd accidentally joined a knitting circle and refused to leave out of politeness. The audience laughed hard when he earnestly asked if anyone needed emotional support or a scarf. When it was over, the applause felt unreal. Backstage, the group hugged, laughed, took photos. Chris felt flushed and alive. "See," Ray said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You didn't die." "Disappointing," Chris replied. "I had a whole backstory planned." Afterward, the group spilled into the lobby where friends and strangers mingled. Chris spotted his mother near the back, eyes bright. "You were wonderful," she said, hugging him tightly. "I had no idea you were so silly." He laughed. "Neither did I." She held him at arm's length, studying his face. You look lighter. I feel it. She smiled, satisfied, and wandered off to congratulate Ray like he'd personally cured something. Chris headed toward the refreshment table, reaching for a cup of water. Excuse me, a voice said. Is this where the fake confidence is stored? He turned. She was holding 2 cups, one extended toward him. Her smile was open, amused, unhurried. I was hoping, Chris said. I ran out during the last scene. She laughed, handing him the cup. You were the guy who apologized to the knitting group. Relentlessly, he said. It's my brand. I'm Alex, she said. My friend was up there, the one who pretended to be a haunted refrigerator. Chris blinked. That was inspired, right? She rolled her eyes fondly. I'm proud of her and deeply concerned. They stood there, sipping water, the conversation unfolding easily. Not clever, not forced. I'm Chris, he said. This was my first showcase. You did great, Alex said. You seemed comfortable. He considered that. That's new. She tilted her head. Good new or terrifying new? Both, he said. But mostly good. They talked about small things. Work, hobbies, the strange bravery of trying something badly on purpose. At one point, Alex asked, so what made you sign up? Chris thought of the journals, of Melanie, of the long inheritance of usefulness. I realized I didn't know who I was without a job to do, he said simply. This seemed like a low-risk way to find out. She smiled. And I'm funnier than expected, he said. Emotionally less sturdy. Same, she said. I collect interests like other people collect plants. Some of them die. He laughed genuinely. When the night wound down, people filtered out in clusters. Chris walked with Alex toward the exit. Well, she said, pausing. This was nice. It was, he agreed. They stood there, neither rushing, neither performing. If you ever want to get coffee, she said, casual but direct, I'd like that. Chris felt a familiar reflex rise, the urge to assess, to plan, to measure readiness. He let it pass. I'd like that too, he said. They exchanged numbers without ceremony. Outside, the night air was cool. Chris watched her walk away, then turned toward home. The apartment no longer felt unfinished. Not because something had been replaced, because space had been made. Later, sitting at his kitchen table, Chris pulled out one of the journals, not to read but to hold. He ran his thumb over the worn leather, then set it back on the shelf. He thought of his father, not as a cautionary tale, but as a man who had loved deeply with the tools he had. Chris had different tools now: presence, choice, rest, love not as labor but as companionship. His phone buzzed. Made it home. Still smiling, Alex had texted. Chris smiled too. He typed back, then stopped himself from overthinking the punctuation. Me too. He set the phone down. Outside, the city moved forward, not urgently, not dutifully, just alive. Chris leaned back in his chair, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a life not yet defined, but finally his to live.